with your host, Ann Eller.
Oh, that's right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We are live on Facebook. We are live on the radio. And we have our guest this afternoon, South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson, running for to be the next governor of the great state of South Carolina. How you doing this afternoon, Alan?
And I am rolling. I hope you're doing well. Happy New Year. It's the first time I've spoken to you since 2025. It's great to be with you again.
Absolutely. It is great to be with you, too. So you've been traveling across South Carolina speaking with voters. What are you hearing from families and communities about the biggest challenge facing the state right now?
Affordability. Just the cost of living, the ability for people to make ends meet. People, families especially, just want to be able to afford the basic goods and services. They want to be able to not have to choose between paying an energy bill or buying medication for their kid. They don't want to have to pick and choose what groceries they're going to buy. I'm talking to local businesses who are suffering, from a lack of profitability because sometimes government gets in the way. That's what's kind of driving our campaign right now. Our North Star is everything that we think, say, or do should go toward making living in South Carolina more affordable for South Carolina families and more profitable for South Carolina businesses. That's what's kind of driving things right now.
Absolutely. Now, of course, that's a big issue, and it's not only here in South Carolina, it's across the nation. So you recently announced this Families First Audit Initiative, which would have your lieutenant governor oversee independent performance audits of state agencies. What problems are you trying to solve with that proposal, and how could you implement it? Probably even a bigger question.
Well, sure. First, that's a great question. Before I tell you exactly what the Families First Audit Initiative is, let me talk to you about my lieutenant governor running mate. That's Mike Rickenbaugh. Mike Rickenbaugh is a businessman who was elected to the state senate 4 years ago. If you recall, he replaced Hugh Leatherman when Hugh Leatherman passed away. Mike, in 2008, he and his wife put all of their money onto buying an automobile dealership, and then the economy fell apart. And they had to fight to survive. They had to make cost cuts. They had to be more efficient. They had to innovate. And not only did they survive, they thrived. And now they own 3 dealerships today. Mike's a 20-year law enforcement constable and game warden, in addition to being a successful businessman with 3 dealerships. Now, he's also a state senator who's climbing the ladder of leadership and has developed relationships across the spectrum of South Carolina government. When Mike and I were talking over the holidays, I asked him, Mike, if you were to be on this ticket and if we decided that we wanted to run together, what would you want to be in your portfolio as a lieutenant governor? Because as you know, the lieutenant governor role is ceremonial in South Carolina. It doesn't have any statutory authority. And he's, and so we wanted to give it teeth. And he says, Alan, it all comes down to families. Everything comes down to families, looking after South Carolina families. And I said, well, it just so happens that every single issue, whether it's energy or infrastructure or education or public safety or judicial reform or government spending or government policies being implemented, whatever it is, it all affects families. If you have education systems crumbling, kids aren't getting an education. If you have a healthcare system that's not meeting the needs of families in rural areas or urban areas, then that hurts families. If energy costs are going up because of a lack of supply or a failed baseload, then that's hurting families. If public safety is failing, if government can't keep its people safe, that hurts families. If the roads and bridges are crumbling and the energy infrastructure is crumbling, that hurts families. So everything comes back to families. So as we started to develop our plan for what we wanted to do, we decided that government needs to be overhauled and restructured. And the lieutenant governor, who doesn't have any statutory role or authority, needs to also be overhauled and restructured. So Mike and I came up with this idea that we were going to have, in the first year of my tenure as governor, we were going to have the Families First Audit Initiative. And basically, we were going to do an overall audit of state government. And there are multiple governmental oversight agencies. There's the legislative Legislative Audit Council, there's the state auditor, and the inspector general's office. They're all siloed and they're all reactionary. They don't go out looking for fraud, waste, and abuse. They react to it when it occurs, and they act in silos. So the first thing we wanted to do was to restructure government and to find outdated and outmoded regulations and laws that have no sunset provision and need to be sunsetted, and identify them and get them removed. The next thing we wanted to do is we wanted to find and identify fraudulent or wasteful spending, and we wanted to have it removed. And then third, we wanted to identify and eliminate policies and practices and laws that are harmful to businesses. We also wanted to implement state-of-the-art technologies like artificial intelligence and blockchain technology, which is a way for us to transmit monies to local governments from state appropriations, and it's impossible to cook the books. People can't take money, steal money, or fraudulently waste money. We wanted to use this initiative that the lieutenant governor would oversee, and basically we would do a comprehensive audit of all of these state government agencies. This initiative would make recommendations on those areas where there needed to be statutory changes, meaning the legislature would have to act. We would give written recommendations to the General Assembly on what agencies are duplicative, what laws are archaic and antiquated, what regulations need to be stopped, where we're leaking funds in state government, what policies are hurting families and kids. We're going to make recommendations to take those out of the statutes or implement new statutes. Then what agencies need to be removed or are duplicative or need to be restructured. What agencies do we need to put under the office of the governor or the lieutenant governor for that matter? We would make all these statutory recommendations. And then we would also make recommendations on what the governor can do through policy initiatives and executive orders. There's a lot of reorganizing the governor can do. And so this initiative that we're putting together would probably within the first few months of my administration make recommendations on executive orders that I could sign that would streamline government and give recommendations to the General Assembly. That is the purpose of this, is to basically make government work for South Carolina families and help make businesses in South Carolina more profitable.
So you're adopting the Ronald Reagan, government is the problem.
Yes, government can be the problem, but here's the thing, Ann.
Yeah.
There are a lot of wonderful men and women in state government, and they're hardworking, but there are a lot of people in state government who don't work hard. They don't have the best interest of the people they serve in mind. In the business world, and Mike and I talked about this when he was running his dealership, the free market was in free fall. They had to cut. They had to become efficient. They had to innovate. And if you don't do that in a business, you get eliminated from the free market through either competition or through inefficiencies. There are no market forces in government that make government actors or government agencies more efficient. People get a paycheck no matter how good or bad they are at their job. Their salaries don't go up and their salaries don't go down. There's no market forces. So what we have to do is we have to inject market forces into government actors to make them act more efficiently, more responsibly, and to make them more accountable to the people. When you do that, the cost of governing goes down. More money goes into the coffers that goes to the people. You're able to cut taxes. You're able to cut regulations, which removes the barriers to profitability in the private sector. This is what it all comes down to. So, yes, government is the problem, and government has the ability to get out of the way of people in the private sector so that they can grow the economy and live, work, and make it possible for families to live, work, and the way that they want to.
Sure. Now, so when you're talking about all these things, you're saying a few months. I guess you're talking about executive orders you can make, but a process like this would take a long time, wouldn't it, Alan?
Well, we're not going to wait 2 years for all of the recommendations to come out. We're going to start with the things that we can do immediately, like within the first 30, 60, 90, 120 days, even first 6 months. I'm going to be enacting policies through executive order that I have the statutory authority to do. Along the way, we're going to be making recommendations to the General Assembly for laws that if they can pass in that first session, we will get them passed. Some of these things, some of these reforms might happen the following year, but we have to start. And by the way, this is not going to start in January when I take office. This is going to start the day after the election in November. We're going to start getting down into the weeds on this, and I'm going to direct every agency director to participate in this initiative, especially in the executive branch. We're going to have the state auditor, the inspector general, and I'm going to invite the oversight committee chairs of the General Assembly as well as legislative audit council members to sit there at the table in a collaborative, cooperative manner to identify these deficiencies in government and remove them.
Well, as you're talking to government and some of these oversight and everything, what kind of response are you getting? Because if you look at government, whether it's South Carolina, federal government, or even local governments, they are resistant to change, Alan.
Yes, people who benefit from the status quo are always resistant to change. But when you provide leadership to people in government, they will follow you. One of my favorite definitions of leadership was from Colin Powell, who said, leadership is the ability to get people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. And it has to start with the governor sitting down with the leaders of the legislative branch of government, who I have no control over, but getting them buy-in to my vision, getting them to buy into where South Carolina needs to go, and then giving them ownership of it. I don't want them to enforce and implement Alan Wilson's agenda. I want them to implement their agenda that happens to also be my agenda. And then, of course, on the executive branch of government, we can do all of this stuff, through executive order. I can direct state agency directors. This is the agenda. Get on board or get out.
I feel some of your military background coming through, Alan.
Well, yes, ma'am. I'm a 30-year combat veteran, and when you're in a theater of combat, you have to follow orders or you have to get out of the way, and sometimes you have to give orders. But look, there are times to collaborate and cooperate with people, and there are times to order people to do things. The governor has to know when the right time is to do that. But look, a lot of this can be done through collaboration and cooperation. I'm talking to members of the legislature right now, and many of them are already on board. I'm talking to members of the Republican Party and even the Freedom Caucus who share these values. And I believe that we can work together to get these things done.
That sounds great. I certainly hope so. I also just want to go on the record of saying I think you made a terrific pick with your lieutenant governor choice, Mike Rickenbach. I think he's a terrific choice. I read his story, his background being adopted, growing up, and all the things that he has done and accomplished. He's a great pick and should be a good right arm to your organization.
Well, thank you so much. Listen, we started talking in the fall, and over the holidays, I made the decision that he needed to be the guy. It's time for a new generation of leadership. It's time for a new direction. Like I said, Mike is a person who has had to fight to survive when the economy fell apart on him. He's learned how to be efficient and innovate. He has been a senior executive leader in the private sector. I have been a senior executive leader in the military as well as in the government sector. Together we have a holistic view on how to reform government and make it work for South Carolina families, and he's going to be a great partner in helping me get it done.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds good. Now, let's move on. What about this energy issue, Alan? We were just asked to cut back our power over this snowstorm, and it's really got a lot of people saying, where are we at on energy? And then when you start looking at these data centers coming in, all the things that they're looking at, all the industry to bring into South Carolina, all of that takes infrastructure. What about the energy aspect and the grid as far as that goes?
Well, first off, the data centers and the energy grid growing are a factor of life that we cannot escape. I mean, the amount of information and data being stored in the cloud, the amount of AI being utilized, the power that it takes it has to be created somewhere. Sure. And whether it's in South Carolina or somewhere, it has to happen. When you talk about data centers and the need for the energy grid to grow to support them, there's a lot of things that we can do. For instance, companies that are coming in and making capital investments in South Carolina, like data centers, like Google, for instance, they can bring in their own, we can give them tax credits to incentivize them to bring in their own modular nuclear reactors and their own sources to generate their own energy. And we give them those tax credits, which incentivize them to produce their own power, and the power they don't use, they can sell to local utilities and cooperatives. to then give back to the communities. There are ways to get these companies to provide their own energy infrastructure also. With data centers, not all data centers are the same. They're scalable. Some are big and require a lot of power. Some are smaller. Some are very noisy. Some are very quiet. You have to scale those for review, and you have to let the communities have a say in what data centers are coming there and which ones shouldn't. The environmental impacts need to be considered. There are technologies out there that allow data centers to use recycled water, the same water over and over and over again, so you're not having a big of a footprint on the environment in that area. So what I tell people is this: the technology is there for us to be efficient, affordable, and environmentally conscious and sound without being a public nuisance to surrounding communities. We also have to protect our agricultural sector. We don't want to lose that land. That is why there's a bill in the Senate that Tom Davis is filing called the Data Center Development Act, and it should be seriously considered because it provides a roadmap for sound energy policy to allow data centers to come to South Carolina. But you have to take in consideration all of the factors and all of the sectors who are involved in this.
Okay, that sounds like you have a plan there. Now, this morning I had Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evett on and asked her about your public criticism of your record following the Florence County tragedy. How do you respond to voters who want reassurance that South Carolina's justice system is keeping communities safe?
Well, I'm not quite sure what her criticism was. Okay.
Well, how about just answering that part of the question for me? Because I don't have the clip for you right here, but she did expand upon it.
There was a. I think I understand what you're asking me. There was a woman last week who was lured to buy a puppy.
Yes.
And there were some people who set her up and murdered her because they believe her son had killed one of their friends, if I understand the news reports. She, this woman was murdered and set on fire, and I believe that the lieutenant governor blamed me for that, which is absolutely ridiculous because we didn't have that case. And, here's the other thing. If I'm guilty of something wrong, then why aren't all the law enforcement agencies under the governor's office, equally to blame? The reality is we had nothing to do with that, and when people start attacking you for things as ridiculous as that you have nothing to do with, you're going to attack local law enforcement. Are you going to attack the governor and the state law enforcement division and the Department of Public Safety? Of course not. It wasn't their fault either. But for her to make the allegation, if that's what you're talking about,
yes,
for her
that's
to make
what I'm
that
talking
allegation
about. Yes.
Is ridiculous. What I would say to people is evil will always exist and bad people will always be out there, which is why we have to be vigilant. Public safety is a core function of government. We need to make sure that they are adequately trained, adequately retained, and adequately staffed and resourced. As governor, I will always make public safety a priority. I have done that as Attorney General. I have created and grown the Human Trafficking Task Force, making it the gold standard in this nation. I have quadrupled the size of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. I have supported the state grand jury investigations that have seized hundreds of millions of dollars in illicit fentanyl and cocaine and meth. We've gone after illegal aliens who are part of gangs like Tren de Aragua and Mexican drug cartels. And we're going to continue to do that to my last day in office, and we're going to continue to support that when I become governor. So I'm a big supporter of our men and women in blue, and we're going to continue to support them after I'm elected.
Great. Now, another question is, while casinos, they're still being debated in South Carolina. If legislation reached your desk as the governor, what principles would guide your decision to sign or to veto it?
First off, I'm never going to sign anything without getting buy-in from all the stakeholders. And stakeholders on issues like that would be the faith community and, of course, the law enforcement community. That's where I am on that issue. I could never buy into anything until after I've heard from those people. The faith community, I want to talk to the faith leaders. I want to talk to the law enforcement leaders and the folks on the ground. And I want to understand how any decision that I make at the state level would affect local communities.
So the answer to that question is?
Well, I'm not going to sign off on anything until I have buy-in from the faith community or the law enforcement community. I want to understand what the impact of a signature on a bill like that would have. Right now, I haven't had an opportunity to sit down with an actual piece of legislation in front of a room full of law enforcement officials and faith leaders, as well as business leaders. I want to hear from everyone. So, again, I could not sign something unless I had a consensus from the law enforcement community, the faith community, and the business community. I would not sign it without their buy-in or without their involvement.
Well, it is a pretty big issue in front of our state right now, though, right? In the
It is.
legislature.
And
Yeah.
again, my position has been, as I talked to faith leaders and law enforcement officials, I made a commitment to them that I would never endorse or support anything without their buy-in. And, I look forward to getting their buy-in when I'm governor.
Okay. And what about this? What about this? This is an additional question I didn't have in my list here. But what about what is happening with this law on hemp products and the energy drinks and all of this, Alan? Do you think that we should? Where are you at on that issue? Let's just leave it open. Where are you at on that issue?
Well, first off, the legislature needs to provide a regulatory framework for companies that produce hemp-infused drinks with a legal pathway to go forward. I've talked to law enforcement and I've talked to the producers of these drinks, and either ban them outright or provide a legal standard and a regulatory framework that people can follow that keeps these drinks from being addictive or from having any type of negative impacts on people's health. Again, common sense, tells me that when you have a legal regime or a regulatory regime that is confusing and allows people to produce drinks that are very intoxicating, then you probably shouldn't have those drinks on the market. But there are ways to provide a pathway for people to have drinks that don't have the intoxicating effects or extreme intoxicating effects that other type products would have, like marijuana or other types of drugs.
Okay. And what about there's been a lot of, I know that I'm sure you're aware of some of our smaller towns with their mayors. They've had some issues, and do you think that many of our smaller South Carolina towns still operate under that traditional mayor-style system and struggle to fund a professional city administration? Do you believe the state should rethink how local governments are structured or supported?
Well, it's a balance, Ann. I mean, I'm a big believer in home rule. I mean, obviously, you don't want Washington, D.C. coming down here and governing Columbia any more than you want Columbia going to your local town or city council and trying to govern you, because the government that is further away from the people should have less power over the people. Your local city council or town council should have more say in how government works in your local town than Columbia or Washington, D.C. With that being said, there are certain areas of the state where the governance structures are outdated or outmoded, or they facilitate corruption, or they facilitate abuse of government practices, and people aren't catching it because there's just no oversight. And I think the state can provide general oversight. The state, at the state level, we can provide general guidelines, but at the end of the day, we have to allow local people, local governments, to govern themselves. But we just may need to provide a general framework or guardrails for some of those more rural areas that need assistance.
Okay, I think that's a fair assessment of this. So, Alan, as you look at this run for the governor, if you are elected governor, how will families in our smaller communities like Greenwood and 96 and all around the state, how will they know that their voices are being heard in Columbia?
Well, first off, I plan to be a governor who spends more time on the road than in my office. I think it's important not only for the governor, but for the agency directors on my cabinet to be out on the road, doing listening tours, taking information, making decisions based on how it's having an impact on local communities around the state. Not just talking with local businesses and local governance structures, but also engaging with local legislative delegations. Having constant communication and cooperation and input and insights from people who live in very rural areas and places that people don't think about that often. People in Columbia probably aren't thinking about how things are being affected in Greenwood County. The only way to know how people are being impacted is to talk to people there, to talk to the delegations and the representatives and the business leaders, and to get their input and insight. One thing I have always promised, Ann, I have never promised to be a perfect governor. I've never even promised people that you would agree with everything I did. I have always promised that I would be an accountable governor and an accessible governor, and a governor who will fight for you, a governor who will roll up his sleeves and do the dirty work, what needs to get done. That is my commitment to the people of your community when I'm elected and take office next January.
And Alan, what about how can people find out more? What would you like to tell the folks about yourself and about your organization, and where can they find out more information?
Thank you for that. There's a website. It's Wilson for SC, Wilson, FORSC.com. You can go there. We're going to be putting up policy positions there. If you want to order bumper stickers, signs, if you want to contribute, there's a donate button there. There are ways to communicate. Send us emails. If you want me to come to events or come give a talk to your local Rotary Club, your church group, your community group, if you want me to come to a house wherever two or more gathered, I will go. We just got to get it on the calendar. At the end of the day, my campaign is not just about me telling everyone that I talk to what I'm going to do as governor. It's about learning what you, the people, want your governor to do for you. It's about implementing your ideas and letting my campaign be a vehicle for the best ideas, not Alan Wilson's ideas. And some of the best ideas I've ever had come from people I talked to on the campaign trail. So go to our website, engage us there. When I come to town, Ann, I'd love to come in studio, do this again. I'm going to be having events up there in the next month or so, and I look forward to talking to the people. At the end of the day, I want to say thank you to everyone who's listening. Thank you for giving me this forum. And Ann, if I may, everyone who is listening to this cast right now, I'm asking for your vote. If you decide you don't want to vote for me, that's fine. But the reason can't be I didn't ask you. I'm asking everyone to allow me to continue to be their employee and to serve as trustee of the office of governor. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Alan Wilson, South Carolina's Attorney General, running on the quest for governor for the great state of South Carolina. Thank you for calling us in this afternoon.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Okay, God bless. Bye-bye. All right, that is Alan Wilson on the line with us right here. I hope you enjoyed that interview. I think we've had two great interviews today. We will, this one, of course, will post immediately because I did do Facebook Live. Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evans interview. We will have to, I've got it recorded. We will be posting that maybe not today, maybe tomorrow. So we will have that one up, I hope, by tomorrow so that you'll be able to compare the answers of these two top-tier candidates that we have running right here in South Carolina. I'm going to tell you what, this race is going to get very, very interesting. Nancy Mace has already... what shall we say, has popped up again. I did ask Alan about that. Evidently, the policy group that does that poll uses a lot of not regular voters. Okay, that's what Alan told me. We'll have to check that out and see. But Nancy Mace is back in the running. She was fell off the ledge, but she's back on. Norman has pulled himself up some, and he has not really, I will use these words, begun to fight. So it's going to get real interesting. This is February. Official campaign signing up for governor and all offices is in March. And the primary is June 9th, so expect that we're going to get inundated with lots and lots of information coming our way. You'll want to make sure that you are following us on WCRS radio because we will be doing a lot of interviews with a lot of the candidates out there, And it's the time that I look forward trying to be fair, balanced, and giving everybody an equal platform to come right here on WCRS. We certainly will look forward to some in-studio interviews. It's fine to do them on the phone, and over the years, I guess I've gotten pretty good at it, but my preference is to have someone sitting right across from me, as I'm sure you know I do. Anyways, that is going to do it for today's show. I will be back in the morning. As you know, I am going to go over to Lander with Supreme Court Chief Justice is speaking. In fact, he started speaking right now, and I hope to get over there and maybe get a little sound for tomorrow morning. So stay tuned right here on WCRS. You know who I am. I am Ann Eller, and this is the job I love, the voice of Greenwood. Have a good afternoon. Take it away. Drop the curtain and start the music in. Okay, I think I will. Bye-bye, everybody.